The story of David and Goliath. In the gentle hills of Bethlehem, where shepherds watched their flocks beneath star-studded skies, lived a young man named David, the youngest of 8 brothers. He spent his days tending sheep in the rolling meadows, where wild flowers nodded in the breeze and clear streams whispered ancient songs. David's heart was as pure as morning dew, and his spirit soared like eagles in the wind. During the long, peaceful hours watching over his flock, he learned to play the harp, his fingers dancing across the strings like sunlight on water. His music would float through the valleys, bringing peace to all who heard it, even calming the wild creatures that roamed the hills. In those same days, far from David's quiet pastures, a shadow lay across the land of Israel. The Philistine army had gathered in the valley of Elah, where ancient olive trees cast dappled shadows on the earth. The army of Israel, led by King Saul, had come to meet them, and the two forces settled like great flocks of birds on opposing hillsides, with a wide valley stretching between them like a green river. Among the Philistines was a warrior named Goliath, who stood as tall as a young cedar tree. His presence on the battlefield was like a mountain casting its shadow across the valley. Each morning and evening, as the sun painted the sky in gentle hues of gold and rose, Goliath would step forward to challenge any Israelite warrior to single combat. Meanwhile, in the peaceful hills of Bethlehem, David's older brothers had joined King Saul's army, leaving David to tend the flocks. His father Jesse, gentle as the morning light, would often send David to bring food and news to his brothers, keeping the bonds of family strong as vine branches reaching toward the sun. One morning, as dawn light spilled like honey across the hills, Jesse asked David to carry provisions to his brothers. David rose early, arranging the bread and grain with careful hands, entrusting his sheep to another shepherd like precious jewels being placed in a safe holding. The journey to the valley of Elah flowed like a gentle stream, each step carrying David closer to his destiny. The morning air was sweet with wild herbs, and birds called softly from ancient olive trees that lined his path. As he approached the valley, the rising sun cast long shadows across the land, painting the armies in soft shades of gold and amber. David arrived as the soldiers were moving into their positions, like leaves settling after a gentle breeze. The air hummed with quiet tension, like the moment before rainfall. As he searched for his brothers among the gathered warriors, Goliath's voice rolled across the valley like distant thunder, speaking his daily challenge. The young shepherd watched as the Israelite soldiers drew back from the valley edge, their movements as quiet as deer in the forest. Even the bravest among them felt small before Goliath's towering presence. David listened to the warriors speaking in hushed tones about the challenge, their words carrying on the morning breeze like scattered seeds. His heart, trained by years of protecting his flock from lions and bears, stirred within him like water disturbed by a gentle wind. The same courage that had guided his hands to defend helpless lambs now rose in his spirit, steady as starlight. While others saw an unconquerable giant, David saw only a challenge to the God who had walked with him through peaceful valleys and beside still waters. With steps as sure as a mountain stream finding its path, David made his way to King Saul's tent. The morning light filtered through the tent walls, casting soft shadows as David spoke of his willingness to face Goliath. His voice was calm as evening settling over the hills, carrying the quiet confidence of one who knows the shepherd who guides his path. King Saul, his crown catching the gentle morning light, looked upon David with eyes soft with concern. Like a father watching his child approach the edge of deep waters, he spoke of David's youth, of Goliath's lifetime of warfare. But David's response flowed like cool water from a deep spring, telling of his encounters with lions and bears while protecting his flock, of how the same divine presence that guided his hand then would guide him now. The king, moved by David's quiet faith that settled in the tent like evening dew, offered his own armor. They draped the royal armor over David's shoulders, the metal gleaming softly in the filtered light. But David, gentle as morning mist, removed the heavy garments. Like a bird choosing the freedom of open skies, he would face this challenge as he was, with the tools that had served him faithfully in his shepherd's life. Walking to the stream that wound like a silver ribbon through the valley, David chose 5 smooth stones, each one carefully selected like precious gems. The brook whispered ancient songs as it flowed over his fingers, the same waters that had carved these stones through countless seasons. His familiar sling, worn smooth as polished wood, hung ready at his side. The valley stretched before him like a green sea, the morning sun casting long shadows across its peaceful surface. Goliath emerged from the Philistine ranks, his armor catching the light like scales of a great fish. His shield bearer moved before him as a leaf drifts on the wind, and his spear was tall as a weaver's beam. The giant warrior, seeing the approaching youth, spoke words that rolled across the valley like storm clouds. But David remained as calm as still waters, his faith wrapped around him more securely than any armor. The peace that had filled his days watching sheep now filled his heart, steady as the ancient hills themselves. Moving with the grace of one who has walked many miles in wild places, David stepped forward into the valley. His presence was like that of a young deer, unafraid in its own forest. The armies watched from their hillsides, still as scattered stones. As morning light cooled in the valley between them, the 2 figures moved toward each other like celestial bodies drawn by an unseen force. David, small as a sapling before a mighty oak, carried himself with the quiet dignity of one who walks in trust. His words, when he spoke, floated across the hushed valley with the strength of summer wind through mountain passes, speaking not of his own power, but of the divine presence that had guided his steps through all his days. With movements flowing like water over stones, David placed a smooth pebble in his sling. The leather, supple from years of use, felt familiar in his hands like an old friend. As Goliath moved forward, his heavy steps marking the earth like summer thunder, David began to turn his sling. The motion was as natural to him as breathing, learned through countless hours protecting his flock. The stone flew from the sling like a star across the morning sky, its path true as an arrow's flight. In that moment, time seemed to flow like honey, slow and sweet. The stone found its mark with the gentleness of a seed finding fertile soil. And Goliath, mighty as he was, swayed like a great tree in a storm before falling softly as autumn leaves to the earth. A hush fell over the valley like evening settling into night. The silence was complete as desert stillness, broken only by the soft whisper of wind through grass. Then, like spring waters breaking free of winter's ice, a great movement began among the armies. The Philistines, seeing their champion fallen, turned and flowed like a river toward their lands, while the Israelites moved forward like waves reaching shore. David stood quietly in the valley, as still as the ancient olive trees that had witnessed this moment. His victory was not celebrated with harsh cries, but received with the quiet gratitude of a shepherd counting his flock safe at evening. The stone that had brought down the giant was no larger than a dove's egg, proving that the smallest things, when guided by faith and wisdom, can accomplish what mighty armies cannot. King Saul welcomed David with the warmth of sunrise breaking over hills. Like a stream joining a river, David was drawn into the king's service, where his gifts of music and wisdom would flow together with his courage to nurture and protect the people. In time, his path would lead him to become king himself, but he never forgot the peaceful lessons learned in quiet pastures under open skies. As we rest here in the gentle darkness, letting this ancient story settle in our hearts like evening dew, we can draw forth its timeless wisdom. We see how courage does not always roar like a lion, but sometimes whispers like a brook in spring. We learn that true strength often flows from a quiet place of faith, steady as starlight on still waters. The story reminds us that we need not wear borrowed armor to face our challenges, but can trust in the gifts and wisdom we have gathered along our own path. Like David with his simple sling and stones, we often find that the tools we know best serve us better than borrowed splendor.